He has wiped out by his grace through faith in Christ your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 112 of the Pastor Discussions Podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joe, and this is your conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
Yeah, we've taken a little bit of a break because you were on vacation and preaching at various churches for pastors that were on vacation. Yeah. So you're back now.
It has been a whirlwind.
It has.
Not just myself, but for things around here.
Yeah,
as well,
everything. So you're back now, and then we got a couple weeks, and then I'm going on sabbatical. So
first ever sabbatical. Harbor Drive.
Yeah, I know, right? So we wanted to come back and tackle. We're sort of in the middle of this sort of series thing where we were talking about discipleship in the context of relationships, experiences, and information. We talked about relationships and experiences. And I wanted to start off by just tying back to that experience thing. I had this really interesting epiphany. So if you have listened to or were at church when we had this sermon series, one of the things that sort of leaned into a little bit in that was some C.S. Lewis. And there's this really interesting quote I ran across that talks about the value of the material world. And he talks about Lewis. I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but Lewis talks about how we can't think of ourselves as more spiritual than God. You can't be more spiritual than God, and God has chosen to reveal himself and create us to experience a physical world. And so a lot of times, especially in the community of people that are very sensitive to the abuses of experience in the church, there can be a wholesale sort of rejection of that word experiences. Yet at the same time, God has created us to be experiential by giving us a physical world and a physical body and five senses and all of the rest of these things. And so I think when we're thinking of if you were struggling with the whole thing with experiences, like that balance is so key and so important in all of this. And that kind of leads us into balance in all three of these: relationships, experiences, and information. So today we're going to talk about information a little bit and the role of information in discipleship.
There's even balance in those five senses, though. Like if you lose one of them,
exactly,
there's a piece missing to how you experience things. Versus, and it's the same way in this three-legged
stool that we're building,
that we've built on relationships,
stool of discipleship
and information. And I think as we talk about this tends to be the one that we harp on the most because we live in a culture in the heartland that is very much, this tends to be the strong leg of the stool. Like, this is the one that people gravitate to. It's the one that they feel safe in because the other ones are, they're messy because you can't really, you can't box them up like real neatly. They come in different ways, and there's no way to, I think, like, people don't think they're safe.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to throw a safety net around them and say, this is the way that you can experience, and this is the way that you can do relationships every time. Like, it's not a nice, neat list of, you go 1, 2,
you can't package
3, 4.
it easily.
Information is easier to do that. Now, I think when you do that, you cripple it a little bit, but you can put information in a start here, go through these 5 steps, finish. I've got my spoonful of what I need to do out of this information. And then I walk away with it. And there's a false sense of safety there that I got what I was supposed to out of it.
Right.
And so that tends to be the danger. I think that's why we harp on it. So I want to say there's at the beginning.
There's an analogy though I want to give you. I think you'll appreciate this. This is, in some cases where there's information heavy churches or information heavy Christians, they're like a bodybuilder that only works on arms, and they've got little chicken legs and their pecs don't work. Like they're just like they're like what's that Popeye, like the Popeye arms, and then really skinny frame. And what we're saying is that you've got to work out the whole body. Like you've got to have the leg day and the chest day and the arm day, and the three of them work together to make a whole healthy person. So
that's a good one.
Thank you.
I know. Okay, so
I've been working on similes.
Right. I wanted to state that at the front because my tendency is to come down hard on heavy information, and I think we need to be careful too, to be balanced in how we approach this. But I want, if you're listening to this, to know that if we harp on information a little bit more than the other two, that's why. Yeah,
it's a weakness, and the danger is to not let the pendulum swing back the other way and go too far in the other direction, which is anti-intellectualism, anti-information, which is not at all where we're at. So let's talk about what's the role of information in discipleship, in the Christian life, in the church.
To inform.
It is. That's a very technical wooden definition.
So I don't think, as I've thought about this too, because I've had lots of time to think over the last month, information plays a huge role.
Absolutely.
And information plays a role not just in the information leg, but it plays a role in the experience leg, and it plays a role in the relationship leg. Like these things, we also need to be careful to not separate them into three separate things.
Yeah, we're talking about them in separate things for the purpose of communication, but
they all work together.
They meld together.
I think one of the biggest things I would want to steer people away from is thinking that information is only in a formal sense.
Yeah.
So it's taking in information, whether that's through sermon or through reading or through lectures or through schooling, like whatever that is. I think we tend to think of information in that realm.
Yeah.
And we discount the information that we're gathering as we do experience and as we do relationships. So I think the biggest danger, as I explain what's the role of information, the role of information is it does inform us, but it informs not just our intellect, it informs us how to feel. It informs us how to. So when you experience an emotion, the information helps you filter that through. Okay, how should I react correctly to this emotion? Otherwise, if I don't have the right information, and I'm not taking the information that's making me feel that way, then I can be driven by my emotions, right, and become. What's the word when you're just all emotions?
Emotional?
Well, there's a word that you've been using. We'll come back to that.
But even in that, I think it's important to clarify because it's right information, because we're always taking in information, and your response to emotion might be influenced by wrong information or wrong thinking.
Right.
So
that's where I was getting, though, is information. The leg, I would say itself, is the this is the one where we analyze the information that we're taking in. We need to realize that we're always taking information in.
Right.
And so this is where reason meets, I think, those other two legs, right? And it's like, okay, there is right information and wrong information as I'm taking in emotions, as I'm engaging in conversations and relationships, as I'm sitting under sermons or reading or listening to podcasts or, whatever that is. There's always information coming at me. So the role of information is it's like deciphering to me. It's like, how am I, as I experience this, what is it that I'm experiencing?
It's like it's interpreting. It's the means by which we can interpret things around us. and things that we go through and things inside of us. And it's an interpretation lens. So if we've got you can interpret the world through emotion, which is not helpful.
But it is part of how we have to interpret
Exactly,
the world.
but your emotions need to be interpreted through right information. So information and emotion work together,
and vice versa.
And emotions inform information, or emotions can inform information. In other words, you can be driven, like for example, in our culture, you can be driven. I have a certain feeling about this, therefore I'm going to look for information that supports that. Or you can have information informing emotion, where you have this data, and then the data is informing how you rightly feel.
So, and that's what I would say is the correct way to do it. So would you agree then that at the base of this, maybe we need to make a pyramid instead of a table, but at the base of this, we have to have right information.
Yes.
Otherwise, you run into emotionalism,
right,
or experientialism, or you're driven completely by having your feelings and those emotions fulfilled through relationships.
Exactly.
So to have correct emotions, affections, correct experiences, correct relationships, information still has to be correct.
Absolutely.
And I think that truth is why we have gotten into this place where information is king, and the other two are kind of cast aside, is because without the right information, you get the abuses like the bad charismatic movement in the church, or the things that we're seeing out in our society right now with the BLM movement and the Marxism that's starting to bubble up here. Yeah. Like those are built out of emotionalism and experientialism with bad information, wrong information.
Right.
So,
and there is a danger to information as well, and information can become unaffecting. So think, for example, of let's take it outside of a Christian context and put it into context of school. Like you can get information to pass a test, and then quickly forget that information and move on with life because it doesn't have any real bearing on your life. It doesn't affect how you live. It doesn't affect your life in any way. And so information that we're talking about, especially in a Christian context, is effective. It affects us and how we live and how we feel and how we think about the world and everything else, which is another reason why that the importance of right information is held up so much. And the danger is, especially within the church, information can be an end unto itself, where it's gathering, consuming, corralling information, but that information never really moves beyond the head into affecting the heart and the action.
So I would agree completely with that. I also think there's another large danger that I see, not just in the Christian world, but in the world abroad, is do you ever let information that challenges your presuppositions in to see which one is right, so that your experiences and your relationships are brought into the right context along with the right information.
Yeah.
Some people are so stubborn and so closed off to any information that is contrary to what they already believe and feel.
Right.
And that's bad information as well. If all I can do is surround myself with people who believe the same things that I believe, say the same things that I say, and never challenge that information with different information, so that I can, we're saying information a lot, but so like, I think what we're walking through now with COVID is a great example. So you've got two sides to most of what you hear out on social media, because that's where and just the mainstream media as well. You're hearing one side. In the middle, I think, is where actually most people are. Yeah. Which is reasonable, willing to hear the two sides and then hopefully look at the actual facts and the data and then come to a decision. But what those two sides do is say, well, all these people on this side are moronic, and then the other side says all these people on this side are moronic. And they actually never even hear what each other is saying because they've made up their mind and they surround themselves with people who only think that way.
Yeah.
They're never willing to take in any new information or anything that is contrary to what they've already decided. That leads to a really bad spot where, again, information is king, but it's the wrong type of information. And that's just one example. You see it in the theological world too, in the separating of sides over different issues, whether that's eschatology is one that people just go to one side or the other and they won't talk to each other. There's other ones.
And so there's a biblical foundation for what you're saying too, because we're told to test everything and hold fast to that which is true. If you're to test everything, that means that implicit in that is you're receiving new information.
See, but I think that people pretend to receive.
Yeah.
And they don't actually really think about what's being said. They don't actually really take in the information that the other side is presenting and is willing to run it through their grid and test it, whether that's out of ignorance or arrogance or fear or whatever it is. You see it again and again. And it's like, if you guys would just talk and hear one another, I think you'd figure out that you're not actually that far apart.
Here's a really interesting thought that I just had as you were saying that. To illustrate how these three elements can interact with one another, relationships and experiences can hinder information. So think about the church and think about how resistant people are to doing things differently in the church. Well, why is that? It's because, first of all, there's experiences. So many people are like, well, we did this when I was a kid and it really impacted me.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Experience. And then what we do is we surround ourselves with relationships that have shared experiences like that. And we've all had those same experiences. So then this must be the only way of doing things. And then when somebody comes in and says, hey guys, this is even on issues where the Bible clearly speaks about certain things, there can be such an entrenchment because of experiences and relationships that there's a closed offness to, that's not even a word, being closed off to hearing new information and letting new information shape how we do experiences and relationships.
It's just letting it challenge. Like, are you willing to hear it? And even if it's wrong, do you not see how that strengthens you in what you already believe and actually helps you to stand more firm? It's like, why would you, like, debate 101? You want to hear someone's strongest arguments against you to be able to see if what you're standing on actually holds up.
Right.
You don't want to hear the weak, junky stuff or ignore it and say, well, this is what I believe. I'm not going to actually listen to that and then let that like work itself in so that I can say, okay, maybe I'm wrong on this point, but it helps me sharpen the way I explain this. Maybe it reveals a spot that's weak or a spot that's missing. It's like, hey, I haven't thought through that. I need to think through that. I just think that's one of the biggest, that along with what you had talked about information for the sake of information. I think those are the two biggest problems that I see in the information world. And isn't it funny that both of them are because somebody stands on experience too much? Yeah. It's either fear of experience or it's experience matters more than information.
Exactly.
Like that's the weakness of both of those.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Because the information for the sake of information is, I'm afraid of the experiential part of it.
Right.
And then the other side is I've experienced this and I've got relationships. Those are more important than this other information. I don't want to risk fracturing that for the sake of information.
So right information then should necessitate movement, right? So I think it was Francis Chan had this example or this illustration is like the way that we treat the Bible is like him telling his daughter to go clean her room. And she goes and disappears and comes back an hour later and says, Dad, I memorized what you said. You said, go clean your room. I can say it in Greek. And my friends and I are going to get together next week, and we're going to have a Bible study, and we're going to have a study, and we're going to talk about what it would look like if we cleaned our rooms. And he's like, no, all I wanted you to do was actually clean your room, you know? And I think that we fall into that in the danger side of information. We fall into that, I think, in the conservative evangelical circles that we are a part of, more than the experientially driven type of what would be more of the bad charismatic circles. We tend to, in our context, tend to gravitate more toward the accumulation of information without the accompanying transformation in living that it should bring. And so we run into these issues pastorally where somebody will have an experience, a bad experience or something like that, and they'll know all the right things. But there's a disconnect between the experience and the knowledge. The knowledge has never been applied to the experience. It hasn't moved from the head to the heart so that it can move into the hands and really impact and affect how we interpret that experience, how we walk through that experience, how we, in some cases, endure that experience, how we understand what's happening in our world around us or in our lives. And so the importance of information is not isolated to the knowledge. It has to move beyond just being able to regurgitate into actually impacting and affecting how we live. And that's going to translate. That's where that connection is between the relationships, the experiences, and the information. We learn through experiences. We learn through relationships. Our relationships provide a context for experiences and a context for information transfer. Information should help us to interpret our experiences and should impact how we do relationships with one another. It's like this amoeba that's just, it blends into itself. And so
it shouldn't be, this isn't something, once you grasp it, that is hard to see and hard to think about. It's not like, well, I got to think about information, I got to think about relationships, and I got to think about experiences when I do those three things. No, you stand up on the table and you just do them.
Right.
And they're happening. The argument here is don't discount what's happening as one's more important than the other. So some would say going to Bible study, going to church, going to Sunday school, information. I have to pack myself full of that. That's the most important. That's king. And then experiences and relationships are underneath
if they happen, they happen. If not,
right. Like that's not what we're really there for.
Right.
And what we're arguing is, no, you are there for all three equally. And one will maybe come to the surface more than the other two, but it doesn't mean, like when you sit in a Bible study in a Sunday school and when you go to corporate worship, primarily you are not there for you.
Right.
Like you will benefit from being there. Yes. But the benefit comes from all the other people being there together and all of you learning together, all of you challenging one another, or all of you worshiping together. That happens in context of relationship and a shared experience around similar information.
Yeah. So
those three things are always happening. And so if you grasp this, that's where I think our challenges come, is like grasp that these things are always happening, because this changes the way that we view our lives as Christians, especially when it comes to discipleship.
Yeah.
At least it has for me, because you start to understand that every moment you're with someone, you're doing those three things. Therefore, you're discipling. You're always discipling away or towards Christ in everything that you do, because even whether you're by yourself or you're one-on-one or you're one-on-three or you're in a crowd of people, you're always taking in information. You're always experiencing something, and there's always relationship. And even when you're by yourself, you're not by yourself.
Yeah.
the relationship between you and the Lord has a chance to do something different there than it does when you're around other people.
And this is not what I'm about to say is not to discount the importance of the Bible. I just preached a whole sermon on why the Bible is important. But we can also fall into the trap of thinking we're only getting information when we have our Bible open or when we're at a Bible study, or like you said earlier. But the Bible itself says that the heavens are telling of the glory of God. They're telling of the glory of God. The earth proclaims his handiwork. In other words, the entire creation is aimed at teaching us something about God, teaching us something about the fall and sin, teaching us something about redemption. When you read stories, every good story follows the story of the Bible. There's a good situation that is brought into peril, and then there is someone that makes a tremendous sacrifice to make things right, and then things are made right. That's like the sort of the story arc of the Bible is the story arc of what makes good literature, of what makes a good story, of what makes a good movie. There's the tension where the hero might not be able to accomplish what he's supposed to, and he makes things right in the end, right? The happy ending. Everything around us is teaching. Everything. We're taking in information constantly. And the question is, do we have eyes to see it? Will we stop and open our eyes to see the beam of glory going back to the source versus just, walking on past it? There's information that we're taking in all the time. And even especially in the context of relationships, how many conversations have we had with other guys where we're just sitting there and we end up growing because in the context of that relationship, sitting there having that experience, information transfer is happening, and it's not a formal Bible study. It's, in fact, we might not even have our Bibles open. It might be some guy that's saying, "Hey, I was reading this the other day, and this thing just really occurred to me." And then we have a discussion that has Bible in it. Where that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And that connects with what I was reading too. And it just becomes this information exchange where you leave and you're like, wow, yeah, that helped me see God more. That increased my love for God. That I need to maybe change this in my life because I'm not honoring God in this aspect of my life. And that's the aim of information. It happens all the time.
And my plea with people would be to realize that, because we tend to think of discipleship only in formal senses instead of it's all of life, because you're missing out on a huge part of how we grow as believers if you confine it to something that boxed in and that narrow. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's why all three of these are important and have to be held in balance. You were talking about the heavens proclaim the glory of God. We only know that if we know the right information,
exactly.
If we know what the word says. So it highlights the importance of the right information.
Exactly. And I was just going to say, on the other side of that, God's specially revealed truth in the Bible is essential because natural revelation is not enough to be saved. And we need God's special revelation in the Bible to know him more fully, to know him rightly, because I mean, you have people for all since the beginning of time that have created deities and gods out of nature. And so there's a danger in only doing that. I'm not saying only do that, but what I'm saying is understand that when you have the Bible in conjunction with creation, you have an interpretive lens and a framework by which you're always receiving information. Like when we were in Minnesota, I was out doing some photography of the Milky Way and I saw the Northern Lights. Finally, after all the times I've been up there, I've always wanted to see them. And that right there was a moment where that was an experience. And it recalled information about God, right, about his glory, and then what I did was I went and I actually researched a little bit about what the Northern Lights are. And it made me appreciate God and his creativity and his design in the perfection of his design all the more, because he creates this beauty that just randomly shows up based on polar interaction.
The right information becomes more beautiful and more glorious when you experience it.
Yeah.
To know that that creation proclaims his glory, and that to experience that truth makes the information that much more special and that much more glorious. And that's done within the aspect of relationship with him, that I can see those things and that I can know those things. And it makes that perfect circle of those three things. That information,
because I went and told people that I was friends with that were there and invited them to come see it with me.
That information is not as valuable to you to just know it.
Yeah.
But when you experience it within the context of relationship with God, like specifically that his glory is being displayed in all creation, it makes the information actually that much more glorious and that much more loved and that much more. And you grow in your hunger to know more. But to just know that truth and to not experience that truth, like, I think as I say that, hopefully we see we all know there's a big difference between those two things.
And it also, when you have the biblical framework, it means that all information is pointing you back to God. So at that event, just to use that as an example, that caused me to go research what the Northern Lights are, which then pointed me back to God as the creator and the one who organized this world that way. So that biblical framework complements with natural revelation to where the result is all information is pointing us back to God and his goodness and his glory and his perfection and his wisdom, and all right information, all truth is pointing us back to that. And it creates an environment in this world where everything is a means of worship. Because as I explain photosynthesis to my kids on a walk, I'm pointing them back to the God who created photosynthesis, as I discover the perfect alignment of the earth in relation to the sun as far as like distance in being able to sustain life. It points me back to God's design in that and his sustaining that. And all of these things, all of a sudden information stops being just information, but becomes a vehicle for worship. Yeah. And that's the goal for information. The goal for information is worship.
But it cannot meet its goal without experience and relationship.
Exactly.
And I think that's a good way to, you cannot worship through information alone.
Yeah.
Like right information should lead to right experience and right relationship.
Even the demons believe and tremble.
And then you have authentic worship.
Yeah.
So
all three are necessary, and all three work together, and all three are it's like a car. Like, you if you have engine trouble, then the car's not going to work. But if your hubs blow out, the car's not going to work, right? All of those pieces, all of those major components in the car are important to the car moving and going.
I do think maybe like not now, maybe next episode or sometime down the road, it would be important to talk about deciphering right information and wrong information, and how we have to be like, you will not have right experience and right relationship without right information.
Right.
And so having the right information and deciphering through all information to see what is right, to what is truth, what is objectively true, is super important as well in this conversation about experiences and information and relationships. So right information, deciphering to see what the right information is, leads to right experiences and right relationships. And then all three of those are important to hold in balance.
Absolutely. So that's if you have any questions or comments or whatever, feel free to hit us up. This has been something that we've sort of been like thinking through, especially in the context of, at least for me, in the context of how do I train up my children in the way that they should go? How do I be a faithful parent, disciple maker. And it's sort of this epiphany where it's like, we have this delineation or this distinction between training our children to walk, or training our children to eat with a fork, or training our children to use the potty on their own, and training our children to love Jesus. It's like there are these two separate things with two separate approaches. One, the teaching them to walk, the teaching them to potty takes into account how God made us and the environment that he put us in, and the design that he has for how we function as human beings. And the other one tends to elevate one element and make discipleship and training people to love Jesus as simply intellectual exercise in practice. It might not be the intention, but in practice, what it can do is it can lend itself to that. And then we have all sorts of people who struggle to actually love Jesus. And I just sort of had this epiphany, like, what if the way that God designed us to function as human beings is to be discipled? And that discipleship happens both in our home as we learn to go potty and in our home as we learn to love Jesus.
Yeah, I think those are great points. Do as parents, because there's a huge concern that young people are leaving the church, right? Have they experienced you loving Christ?
Yeah.
Like they experience, like this will be maybe inappropriate, but why can I have a 3-year-old son who's just learned to go potty? Why does he pee in the toilet? Well, he has seen, right?
Yeah.
He's experienced peeing himself.
Yeah.
And making his pants wet. Like he's experienced these things, and through that experience now learns and wants to do what he sees the other people he loves do.
And it's become a conduit for information transfer in, hey, you peed your pants. You need to go potty in the potty. Human beings are imitators.
Exactly. That's kind of the main point is like,
we're going to imitate something or someone.
Yep. And so why do your kids or do the people around you see your love for Christ? Do they hear you talk about it? Do you say the right things? That's not what I'm saying. But like, do they actually see you loving
experience through your life?
Yeah.
I can't remember where it was, but I was listening to something. They're talking about the importance of children seeing their parents display affection for one another. In particular, dads displaying affection for their wives, and
especially boys.
Yeah. And also like girls too, because what that's doing is that's training the boys as to what they should do, and it's training the girls as to what they should look for, because our kids are going to look for people that are going to mirror the relationship that they experience between mom and dad is the context that they have for relationship when they get older. And that is also true of children experiencing what it means to be a Christian and seeing mom and dad pursuing Christ and loving Christ and living out their relationship with Christ. So while formal Bible studies might be a part of for your family, that's not all of it. That's the point.
Small piece of it too. And so take it outside of parenting too.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing out in the real world.
Yeah.
With the people that we work with, with the people that we spend time with the relationship that we have with as adults with our parents or whatever it is. It's like people you're always experiencing something, and they either experience your love for Christ or your love for self. So what are they experiencing more of? Do you confine the love for Christ and the love that you have for the Lord into these small little compartments of time of it's family prayer time or it's I pray over a meal? Or are they experiencing that through everything that you say and do, or at least in your efforts? Is your effort to always point people back to Christ?
This is the last thing I say, I promise. I think it's 1 Peter. He says, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that is within you. Okay. Those three elements are there. Okay. Reason for the hope that is within you. We all get that. That's information. But always being ready to give a defense assumes that there is experiences where the unbeliever sees something different in you where they're going to ask, right? I don't know of anybody that just goes up to somebody randomly on the street and says, hey, tell me why you have hope. Like, they have to experience the hope that you have. And then number 2 is relationship, because there's some level of relationship where they'd come up to you and say that.
Yeah.
So even in that text that we look at and we're like, information, you have to be ready to give a reason for the hope that's within you. You have to be able to defend the faith. You have to be able to do this. Yes. But they have to see something different in your life, and you have to be around them for them to see.
I would actually argue, how can you defend your faith without experience of God?
Yeah.
Within the context of a relationship, not just the right information.
Yeah.
Like, if you've never really experienced the glory of God in creation, can you really give a defense for the hope that is in you?
All I know is once I was blind and now I see.
Right. But even
it's like it's the experience. That's his witness.
Right. And is that people, I don't think they grasp that that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, if you've really experienced that, then you can defend your faith.
This is what I believe, and this is how that's changed my life.
Yep.
This is how that relationship has changed my life. Yeah. So this has implications not only for discipleship, but evangelism, and which is part of discipleship. But
I think understanding discipleship is everything that we do.
Yeah.
Like you just said, all of life is discipleship, or we're always discipling. Like, if we would grasp that,
yeah,
I think it would also change the way we view life.
Yeah.
Like, every situation, I have an opportunity to worship.
Yeah.
I have an opportunity to point everyone to Christ through my every action. So the way I shoot a gun, the way I swing a golf club, the way I react to those things, the way I react to stubbing my toe, all of those are opportunities to disciple. That's what we were created to do.
Yeah.
So don't discount it and say, well, this isn't discipleship time. This is just my lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, having those 3 prongs, I think it helps us to put that piece in perspective and actually be able to grasp it. And it's like, oh, that, at least that's what I think 4 years of conversation between us has, like, these ideas of always discipling, and then, okay, how do we explain that to people so that they can see it? Yeah. Relationships, experience, information. I think it puts that into perspective to where I can say, oh, it really is that.
Yeah.
And I can explain that to somebody. So
yeah.
So hopefully it's been helpful.
Yeah. We're part of the Bar Podcast Network. You can find out more information about them and get great biblical content for your ear holes at thebarpodcast.com, and check out the Think podcast with Joel Sedekes, and his brother has a new podcast. Everybody's podcasting.
That's the thing to do right now.
It's the thing to do. Yeah. So Parker Sedekes has a podcast.
He should have mustache.
Parker's Pevensies or something. I don't know. He's got a logo and everything. So check that out. And yeah, I think that's all we got.
We should hook him and Ron up sometime.
Oh yeah.
They could have a mustache.
They could have a mustache off. Parker uses, like, I'm pretty sure he uses wax in his. He looks like a 1920s enforcer for
one of the old boxers.
Yeah, exactly. A boxer. That's it. Yeah. So.
All right, well, we've got a few more weeks before we take another little break, so hopefully you'll come back, and we'll be back next week for another episode of the Pastor Discussions podcast. Here we're conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.